Hi everyone, welcome to my review of License to Kill from 1989. So yes, directed of course, once again by Glen, and his final outing of course, as a director for this series of course. And yes, the 16th Bond film. So yes, here we are once again to discuss a Bond film. It's been a few weeks now of course, a few weeks breaking in between this and The Living Daylights. So I guess it kind of works out quite nicely actually to kind of cherish at least these a mere two Bond films. I think that's really sad, of course. We'll get to that, but yes, there will be spoilers in this discussion. Very heavy. This one, this will be on kind of spoilers. So if you don't want to kind of have different reveals given to you, about the plot, the kind of moments in the film, of course, maybe watch the film first. My advice, and then come back to this review, and then from there we can kind of discuss this film. I look forward to that in the comments. So yes, with that said, as always, of course, we are here to talk about this this truly wonderful film, in my opinion. I'll say it now. I'll just say it absolutely very clearly. This review, this discussion, if you will, be very purely overwhelmingly positive. So yes, I'll just say that now. I truly love this film, and for me it's one of the very best Bond films in this series, and just a stunning film. For me, one of the best just action films of all time, really, and just one of the true Bond films for me. This film is stunning, and of course this is very sad. This is the final Dalton film, of course. Dalton Bond. He was of course meant to do a third, at least, and of course, due to different legal reasons and stuff, which we won't get into too much, of course. There's a few, there's many years, kind of delaying this. By the time Dalton was approached once again, of course, to kind of discuss, his kind of take on Bond and returning, of course, to another film. It's too late. I feel. It seems that he just didn't want to, at that point, around 1994, commit to not just another one or two Bond films, but of course it was more. They were kind of pushing the producers, etc., for more, in the lines of 4 or 5 films, more. So I guess it just wasn't going to be, and it's a shame, a real shame. I feel, Lazenby and Dalton. It's just kind of a shame, a big shame. What happened to them? In the sense they only got to do, of course, 1, 2 films respectively, and of course they were so great, and I think so true to the pure, the kind of roots, of this character Bond. I feel they really were so good. And I think it's a shame they both didn't get to do more, and at least for Dalton, even just one more Bond film would have been great. But of course, luckily, in my opinion, we got this film, and of course, License to Kill, for me, is the finest of the 2 Dalton films, Bond films, of course. And I feel, Dalton. We'll talk about Dalton first of all. He, is such a great actor. He's been in many different, period piece films and stuff. Of course, Shakespearean, actor really. Timothy Dalton, and of course I've seen him in things before this, as well. And of course, him being Bond is something very special. I feel just the talent he has, the skill and the commitment. He's often seen. It's heard he was often seen kind of referring to the novels, of course, the Fleming novels, and of course on set, and trying to stick to them, and kind of referencing them as we went through the kind of production of this film in particular, and just trying to really go back to the roots, of the series. He kind of referred to, in general interviews. It seems, kind of returning to what made this series great to begin with, and that's something I really connect to there. Just kind of going back to making this in a particular way, of course, more believable, more kind of something you can kind of believe in seeing in a particular way, and going back to the more hard-hitting, kind of gritty, ruthless, kind of cold-blooded, killing, of Bond, of this character, of this of course, this killer, this ruthless character. Of course, Dalton still brings this charm that Connery, of course, had, of course, Moore had, but it's a different type of charm. Of course, once again, it's going back to the Connery kind of take, in the way of the kind of ruthless, real menacing Bond, someone who is this kind of this brutal individual, someone who's not afraid to really kind of pull the punches, you know. And of course, Dalton, it's very famous, point is, of course, Dalton kind of got involved so much in these stunts to the film, and I think that really makes a difference as well. And just this take on Bond, this pure take on Bond, I feel is particularly in this film truly special. And of course the likability, I find Timothy Dalton to be such a likable individual and actor. Of course, I think he's just so great. I wish he was in more films, but of course he's had a great career. But this film really is stunning. I think not only did Dalton once again, of course, commit to really bringing this character back, going back to the roots of the series, and consistently, throughout the entire film, through entire projects, of course, committing to this and sticking to, this kind of tone. I think everyone else did, and I think, I felt that Living Daylights at first showed promise to be one of the best Bonds. The first half really has this atmosphere, this kind of callback to these traditional Bond films. From Russia with Love comes to mind. Really, it feels like that. It feels like kind of one of these classical Bond films, and it has all these elements there. And of course, I feel the second half of that film, unfortunately, did take a different turn. I think it just kind of it wasn't kind of consistent, that film. I think it's more in vein of the campy, outlandish Bonds. But of course, there's nothing wrong with that in itself. But I think this film here really consistently throughout the entire runtime committed to this grounded, natural, ruthless, kind of take on Bond. I think the other characters in the film as well, all these side characters, of course, just really menacing characters, ones that you kind of believe in what they're doing. At least I did. And of course, the plot of this film is much more grounded as well. Kind of a drug related plot. Sanchez, the main villain, of course, the mastermind drug lord, played by Robert Davi. He is a great actor as well, and he's the villain of the film. And it mainly focuses on this, more of these kind of believable plot elements. Of course, Felix Leiter, a character who is always in different Bond films throughout the series. Of course, very famous character. But in this film, we kind of it's one of the only Bond films we really get a true focus. Very a kind of prominent kind of appearance of this character, and of course one of the main kind of driving forces of this whole first act is, of course, his the wedding, of course, that happens. He's getting married, of course, Felix to Della, and she, of course, gets killed. And then, of course, Felix gets injured, and of course Sanchez set out to kind of take down Felix. And of course our character of Bond, our main protagonist, of course, goes against the rules in some ways, and of course he kind of refuses to kind of be ordered about in this film. That's one of the great things about this film, is the kind of the way in which Bond is kind of someone who doesn't go along with what they kind of tell him to do in this. He doesn't go along for a mission as such. He goes on his own accord. Of course, his license is revoked very early on. Of course, Robert Brown, once again playing M, and I think he's very, very M in this film is very kind of aggressive, I feel. And of course that whole kind of scene there, I just think is a one-off moment in Bond that really is priceless. Of course the license being revoked of James Bond, of course he goes out on his own to pursue Sanchez, and of course Q is in contact with Bond quite prominently in this film. Q kind of has this main role, really, a real big role in this film. Of course, Desmond Llewelyn, playing Q once again, and my favourite, interpretation of Q personally. And I think in this film, this could actually be the absolute best kind of portrayal of Q. And I think the involvement, in the plot, of course, just seeing Q, out on the field in this way, of course, and the involvement as well. With, of course, Pam, the Bond girl of the film, played by Carey Lowell, who is one of the best Bond girls in my opinion. She really is flawless in this film. I think she is one of the absolute best in the series, and just a Bond girl who is an actual character as well. One of them, kind of who can kind of has her own kind of character traits, not just relying on kind of Bond meeting this Bond girl, and she's helping him out and stuff, or kind of going along for the ride. She really is her own character, with her own clear motivations, and Carey Lowell gives a stunning performance. She's wonderful in this film, one of the very, very best. I think just such an epic, kind of character, and of course the relationship, the chemistry with Dalton here really works perfectly. I feel the actual, yes, the performance, the kind of the charm to her character and her performance really is something else. Of course, Pam, and she's of course an ex-CIA agent, of course, and pilot. So of course she has a massive role in the plot. She kind of comes into it, properly, of course, later on in the film. Around the 45-minute mark, she has kind of a bigger role, of course, and from then on, she's one of the main characters. And I think, of course, you've got this really kind of unique love triangle, of course, and just this villain played by Robert Davi, of course, Benicio Toro as well, playing Dario, of course, the henchman of the film, and he is just so good in this film. One of his earliest roles, of course, and Benicio Toro, of course, I've discussed many times on the channel. I'm a big fan of him, and I think he just brings this kind of outlandish kind of insane performance to this film that just works so perfectly. I think just one of the very, very best henchmen, in my opinion, of the entire series. I think, of course, this pairing of of these two actors here, Robert Davi, just so good. It works so perfectly, and of course, he's not just a henchman. He's one of these characters who just shines through in his own right, and just hilarious moments in the film. The tense moments, with Dario, of course, when he notices, Bond, in the kind of in the factory scenes, in the end, in the ending kind of act, of course, and him noticing Bond, realizing, of course, he's seen him before, calling back to that kind of incident earlier on in the film, and of course, just the whole way in which the villain and the hero of the film kind of this whole kind of relationship, this kind of the way in which Bond is essentially an ally to the villain of the film. Of course, him being unaware, of course, this actually who Bond really is, who this character is, and the intentions, of course, and his actual motives. So this is so great, and it just adds for this investment. I get to the film and all the different dynamics, the kind of power shifts, and the entire narrative of this film is just one of the absolute most investing, and thrilling in the entire series. I think this is just such a stunning Bond film. The opening sequence, is absolutely mind-blowing. Of course, the helicopter plane sequence there is one of the best action pieces I've ever seen. What I love about the film as well is the way, a different score, of course, this time. We must mention John Barry, never returned, very sadly, to the series. But of course, Michael Kamen, scoring in this film. And I think just the way in which, particularly, the kind of Bond theme, she's in the film in the different moments of action, in the story beats to kind of just make it more epic, and wow, it really is perfect. I look out for different Bond films, kind of seeing or hearing, of course, the Bond theme, and different renditions, of course, of this in action moments, throughout a film, and this film, in that sense, certainly delivers. I think it really is just so kind of satisfying to see and to kind of hear this theme, and throughout the entire film, littered throughout the different action scenes, makes for even more of a kind of epic, awe-inspiring, and just satisfying experience. And just in general, the way that John Glen directs this film, everything about this, the cinematography, of course, the editing, and just the kind of the commitment to bringing this character back to the original roots of this character, of course, and just really delivering in every act of the film. The structure to this film, wow, really something else, of course, and so patient, this film, in bringing out the different characters, of course, and just as well, I think focusing on existing characters. As I've mentioned, Q has a massive role in this film. I just loved the Q moments in this film. What a great individual, of course. Desmond, Llewelyn was, he really was just such a wonderful, kind of actor, and I think just the charm that he brought to this series, and of course it really is just, as I say, in many ways, at its height in this film. The moment, of course, where him and Bond are about to kind of go to sleep, and of course he's testing out the mattresses. That's one of my favourite kind of key moments, in the series. What a kind of hilarious and human and kind of charming, kind of moment there, and just the subtlety, to these different characters, of course, the existing characters, and of course the new characters, ones that exist, of course, solely in this film. And Sanchez, he's such a great villain. He really is. He's such a menacing, villain, but also at the same time charming, just like Bond. It's kind of like Bond has met his match in many regards, and of course, just the whole way in which he's always kind of in control throughout the film, of course, until the final act, as we know. But that final act, just thinking on that again, what a masterful sequence. The tanker sequence there really is something else. Just one of the most thrilling, sequences of action that I've ever seen in cinema, and of course you've got the Bond theme kicking in there as well, and just seeing, all these different characters, the stakes of this film. I cared so much about the characters, so much about the kind of the plans, the villains in the film, and just going back to this kind of grounded feel, this atmosphere that I think is really at its height in the 60s Bonds, and I think just going back to this truly is something very, very special. But also kind of retaining the magic of the Bond series, and of course Dalton is such a ruthless individual in this film. His physicality, of course, to the character, and just the kind of outbursts in this film, the kind of ruthless moments in this. Wow, what a thrilling film this is, and I think just the way in which John Glen balances out the tone here, so specifically, so perfectly. It feels like a kind of like other films, of course, like Scarface, but at the same time it feels like a Bond film, and it's not a film that just feels like another action film, or just another kind of violent crime film. It really it is a Bond film. It feels like a Bond film in what it does for the character, in what it kind of is doing for existing characters as well, and all the different elements I love so much about Bond. Romance, of course, comedy. There's many different moments of comedy in this film, and of course great action. Stunts. Just magic cinema moments. I feel this is such a kind of a Bond film that really kind of delivers on these different Bondian moments. It doesn't feel maybe like various classic Bonds, but at the same time it does. It has this very unique flavour, and I think Dalton fully commits, and so does everyone else in this film. I think it's just a magical experience. It's such a thrilling Bond adventure, of course. Kind of different locations in this film, very different, of course, to the a number of films in this series, but it feels, it doesn't feel like it's a globetrotting film for the sake of it. It doesn't feel like it's kind of just going from different location, to location, of course, just for the sake of the plot. It really feels organic. It feels like it's, it's a meaningful, kind of narrative, and I think just the way in which, these characters, of course, interact. You've got such a great script to this film, and I think the way in which, it starts off, of course, with Felix, and of course it goes and introduces different characters in a gradual, kind of patient way. I think really it's masterful, and just the kind of the music in this film, just absolutely stunning. Despite, of course, John Barry not returning to this film, this film, the score, really wonderful, of course, by Michael Kamen. And just the title sequence as well. Of course, not really mentioned that, but in terms of the actual design, to the titles, not some of the best in the series, and kind of very much, very similar to a number of different Bond title sequences. But of course, for me, I think it's definitely a great title sequence, and definitely better than a few of the ones that we'd seen. You know, for a while. You know, I think you know, definitely, you know, my favourite kind of title sequences are mostly, you know, these 60s Bonds. You know, just really stunning and just magical, and so much effort put into them. And I think this film, you know, it's not, you know, up there with these kind of these you know, great you know, the best Bond title sequences, but despite that, you know, really so thrilling. And of course the song, the title song, of course, performed by Gladys Knight, you know, really is one of my favourites in this series. And of course just the way in which it's kind of integrated into the score as well. It's just kind of makes for a magical, you know, feeling. I love, you know, Carey Lowell in this film. I love the romances. It's such a romantic film, and just the way in which she, you know, kind of rescues Bond as well. You know, different moments. She's such a great character, and I think just the way in which she, you know, kind of has an involvement in the action as well. You know, one of them, you know, Bond girls, of course, to kind of really, you know, kind of have such a presence throughout, have such a kind of a pivotal role in the film, and I think, you know, just a charming, you know, kind of performance, such a charming, such a kind of memorable performance by Carey Lowell. You know, she is so good in this film, and the chemistry, as I say, works so perfectly. You know, Dalton and Carey Lowell, you know, so perfect together, and I love, you know, the moments, of course, the trio of characters, you know, of course, the Bond girl, Bond himself, and Q as well, and when these characters are together in the mainly in the middle of the film, you know, wow, just so satisfying to see, just so magical, so kind of you know, felt, and just warm. You know, this film is so warm, of course, very violent, very dark and kind of gritty, and of course very shocking film. You know, it's got its kind of cold characters, you know, in the villains, of course, but despite that, at its core, you know, this is directed, of course, with heart. You know, this whole the whole team, you know, involved in this film, you know, just bringing such a wonderful, magical adventure, and you know, it's the most violent, as I've said, the most violent Bond film, you know, for me in the entire series. But despite that, it's got such a particular, you know, charm, such a kind of magic, and such a beauty. You know, once again, you know, you're not focusing too much, you know, on the different, you know, the scenery in the film, of course, like some Bond films would be, you know, kind of doing, of course, in a particular way. But despite that, it is shot wonderfully, and it is a beautiful film and a beautiful experience. You know, in the kind of in the romance, of course, and just you know, the outfit, you know, to this film, really something else again. You know, just really stunning production. You know, very different locations, not too much in the way of sets, like we, you know, see in different Bond films in that kind of sense, but despite that, you know, the kind of the blend, you know, of locations, and just the different moments of action in the film, and you know, the outfits, of course, and just you know, just seeing these different moments as well, you know, at the hotel and stuff, you know, so really you know, kind of sophisticated Bond as well, you know, it's kind of being gritty and raw, and maybe dirty, you know, of course, Dalton, you know, he did, you know, kind of try to bring this kind of feeling back to this kind of, you know, the character of Bond being, you know, this perhaps dirty character, you know, in terms of, you know, the kills perhaps, this ruthless, you know, kind of cold-blooded, you know, individual, of course, in a particular way, but, you know, it's a smooth, charming, you know, film as well, and of course, just a luxury feeling that I feel in many different Bond films. It just really is such a kind of magic, you know, film, magical film, and just wow, you know, the first act, of course. So investing, and just, yes, you know, the opening act, as I've said, you know, such a wonderful kind of way to open this film. Of course, Frank McRae, you know, playing the character of Sharky. You know, that's another standout character that's kind of brought into this film. That's only in this film, of course. You know, you've got all these different recurring characters. You know, but Sharky, you know, is such a kind of great character, and I love the kind of moments early on with him and Bond together, of course. And I think this is one of the instances where the film is really such, you know, felt experience, such a warm film, making me care about these different characters, of course, and, you know, focusing, you know, for example, on Felix, even, you know, recurring character in this series, but actually giving him, you know, real pivotal role in the film. Of course, this emotional weight to the film, you know, of his wife being killed, and of course him being severely injured. You know, of course, and Bond, you know, his motivations are so clear. They're so kind of relatable. You know, in this film, it's just, you know, kind of not, you know, kind of just simply following orders. You know, in this film, and doing something a bit different. You know, going on, you know, starting out, you know, his kind of his own mission, perhaps going on his own accord. His license, of course, being revoked. You know, in this film, just such a kind of an investing, you know, kind of narrative. You know, and all these different motivations. You know, in the film, just so investing. Something I truly get behind, and of course, yes, side characters. You know, the Bond girl, the villain. You know, Sanchez, the henchman. You know, Dario. You know, just as well. The way in which, you know, the kind of negotiations, you know, kind of go, you know, ahead in the final act, of course, and then, you know, Bond putting a stop to these plans, you know, that whole kind of explosive final act. You know, you've got Dario falling to his demise. Very, very, you know, disturbing scene there. Really, really violent. You know, that kind of moment there. I remember when I was younger, you know, being really just kind of disturbed by seeing that whole kind of sequence there. That kind of wow, that is something else. And of course, then leading on to the kind of pursuing, you know, Sanchez, and the whole tanker, you know, sequence. You know, is one you know, masterful Bond, you know, kind of final act. You know, I think, and just the way in which the kind of love triangle, you know, Lupe as well, you know, kind of involved, you know, a character being involved, you know, Sanchez's girlfriend being involved in this kind of love triangle. So it made something for very, very, you know, interesting kind of experience here as well. You know, and the kind of the way in which we have this love triangle. Of course, Bond not really caring too much about this other character, but mainly, of course, having actual feelings for, you know, Pam. Of course, in the end, you know, the way in which it's so satisfying, you know, how he gets together with Pam right at the final moments. Of course, again, Q, you know, his appearance there, and his kind of his presence in this film is so felt. You know, the kind of the moments we all kind of love with Q, where he's kind of you know, kind of acting as kind of a father figure, perhaps, to Bond. You know, at least I feel anyway, and this kind of this banter, perhaps, between them, you know, throughout the entire series, a bit different now, but, you know, of course, with Desmond, Llewelyn, of course, you know, his kind of take on this, the kind of charming, you know, kind of father figure, you know, I feel, just the kind of way in which he was always, maybe, you know, at different times, the humorous way in which he's frustrated with Bond, or just kind of, you know, shaking his head, you know, with these different moments, of course, and the way in which the film ends, the whole kind of, you know, final couple of scenes is so satisfying. It really just ticks all the boxes for me, this film, and more. You know, just everything I love about Bond. You know, and I'm not saying this is one of my kind of top 3 Bonds or anything like that. It's not one of the, you know, the very, very best Bonds in that sense, but it is one of the best Bond films, and just a real masterpiece of an action film. It's one of my favourite films, really, in cinema. You know, just one of my absolute kind of favourite action films, and absolutely for me, one of the best 10 Bond films, without hesitation. This is just an absolute masterpiece, and just every single element in this film. You know, the tone of the film as well, just so perfect. I feel humour, despite being very, very dark. As I say, the most violent Bond film. You know, at least in my opinion. You know, in terms of, you know, what you see, and how it's kind of handled. But of course, it is a film full of heart, full of magic, full of charm. You know, I think just the core elements of this, the core kind of feeling of this, the kind of the humanity to this. You know, this is something that Dalton once again brought back to this character. This kind of, you know, this real felt kind of humanity, instead of just more of a focus on the kind of surface level, you know, of the character, the surface layer of the character. You know, I think this is really getting to the kind of roots of this character, and just this humanity, despite being you know, more of a ruthless take on Bond. It's something that I get more invested in the motivations, you know, of the characters, and specifically Bond as well himself. You know, just seeing this this take on Bond is something truly special. It's not something that throws away, you know, the magic, for example, of the series, as I've been saying. You know, something that is not afraid to go very very dark places. To very dark areas, of course, showing a lot of violence in this film, and of course something where there is many brutal moments in this film. But again, it does not throw away. It does not diminish the kind of magic, the charm, and just the kind of wonderful feeling of Bond. What this film means to me. There's so much. This film, I think, it's just one of the best Bond films. It's just full of masterful action. You've got such investing drama. The narrative to this film, all the different story beats. Full of different turns, of course, going in different areas, and of course, just kind of surprising me, as a viewer. Once that kind of final act, very shocking, final act is over. Looking back on how we've kind of progressed throughout this film, just maybe that final act, kind of just there's so much explosive and just mind-blowing moments that you kind of forget, when you're watching that kind of that piece there, how kind of all the different turns, the kind of the story beats early on, and then of course the entire narrative, the entire experience of this film is such a kind of varied, and just wow, so well thought out film, such a kind of a kind of an investing experience, and one that really just delivers in every way, in terms of being a Bond film, in terms of being just an action thriller, crime film, just full of style. This film, the way it's shot, again, maybe not too much like a Bond film, in some ways, but in the most kind of important ways, this film really feels, truly like a Bond film, and to the roots, once again, back to the roots of the character, the roots of the franchise, and just seeing this film, the final John Glen film, and the final and merely second, Timothy Dalton Bond. It's very very sad, of course. It's very 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 unfortunate, but at the same time, this is one of my favourite Bond films, and I think to go out on this film for Dalton, in my opinion, really, what a way to kind of leave us, in this kind of this take on Bond. Of course, yes, I wished he would have got more. I think he was one of in many regards, one of the absolute best, kind of actors to play Bond. I think really in terms of his acting capability, he's up there with Connery, and I think just as Bond, one of the very very best, in so many different elements, especially in this film. I think he really is at his best here, and of course a bit different to The Living Daylights, of course, in his portrayal. But in these two films here, I think he gave everything he could, and just really delivered on both occasions. Such a stunning, really really stunning and pure take, on this character, and just going back to the kind of the core elements of Bond. Of course, the actual film itself, as well, acting as a real grounded, once again, believable experience in a particular way. Again, I don't need my Bond films necessarily to be, kind of serious takes, more, kind of grounded plots, perhaps. No, but it's lovely to see, nevertheless. And I think on this occasion, I get more invested in this than any of the kind of 80s Bonds. Actually, this is my particular favourite Bond, of the 80s. Of course, if you've seen my reviews, of these Bond films, you'll know that anyway, of course. But yes, for the record, this for me is the best John Glen film, and the best Bond film of the 80s. What a great decade, I feel, and a magical decade for Bond. But for me, this is the absolute pinnacle, of these films, and therefore the pinnacle of the John Glen films. Of course, he directed the entire, catalogue of the 80s Bonds. Of course, and he brought something so varied. Of course, such variety, with these films across these 5 films. But for me, this is where he really delivered, a flat out masterpiece of a Bond film. Just really, as I say, something that's grown on me even more, is this kind of this villain. Wow, what a villain, Robert Davi, really is, in this film. Sanchez, such a great character, and I love the relationship so much. I can't kind of stress that enough. The kind of the relationship between our hero, very very flawed, of course, very complex. In this film, something again, as I've said, I love so much. But this hero and this villain, this relationship, this kind of this way in which they're kind of portrayed in the film, and of course you've got these wonderful moments, at Sanchez's house, how Bond is kind of taken in, in that sense, and just to kind of get into his operations, to kind of get in that way, but the way in which we have this kind of dramatic irony, Sanchez not knowing truly who Bond is, but that wonderful moment, where of course Bond reveals he's a British agent, just that kind of the way in which Sanchez, Robert Davi, of course, kind of says a British agent, and that's a kind of nod of approval there, just the kind of the recognition that he gives him, that kind of moment there, that is just a wonderful moment. It makes me laugh. It makes me kind of. It's kind of such a hard moment to kind of describe. But it's a moment like this that I really just I take from the film. It's such a great villain to this film, and the way in which he kind of has this admiration for Bond, and his kind of skills, and of course. Then, although of course, in the final act, him and Bond, at each other, kind of against each other, and just the variety of different, interactions I feel in that sense that we get from these characters throughout the film, and of course you get a bit of them, kind of being, allies, although of course you have that kind of underlying that subtext there in different moments, that dramatic irony, but then of course being just that kind of true hero versus villain in the final act, and of course then motivations, and them different. Feelings, then different, the ways in which Bond has kind of originally set out to kind of go against Sanchez from the opening act, and all these different moments, of course, and rooted in this event, of course, this horrible event happening to, of course, Felix and his wife. That, of course, coming through in the final act. So I was so invested in all these different moments of action, even more because you have these character moments, you have this whole narrative, this whole arc, of course, in the way in which Bond is hell bent, kind of getting revenge in a sense, and putting a stop to Sanchez, of course. And, yes, the whole kind of way in which the final act plays out, is even more satisfying. Of course, it would have been in itself so much, but because it's such a stunning, final act. But of course, you've got the added weight to this film. You've got these real, I feel felt moments, of course, for these different characters. You've got Sharky as well. Another reason, of course, Bond is, against Sanchez, trying to kind of, he's so kind of determined to bring Sanchez down because all these people have perished that Bond was close to, perhaps. All these kind of side characters who are made so kind of meaningful in the film, and all these different kind of motivations for Bond to finally take down Sanchez and win a kind of final that kind of moment there where of course Sanchez falls, and that whole kind of event, that final act, so kind of satisfying in the kind of relation to this narrative, this arc of Bond in this film. It feels like a Bond film, of course, but it really is such a unique film in its own right, and just seeing this kind of this style, what a unique style that really can't be explained, precisely. It's something I can't quite describe, but it feels like a set of different films. It does feel a little bit like Scarface at times. It feels like a couple of other films as well, perhaps. And yes, at the same time, it feels such, like such a true Bond film as well, and just in, in the sense as well, simply to deliver the elements that I really love about Bond in general, not just specifically to the series, but what the series brings to me. Great romances, at its best, of course, and great action set pieces, ones that are kind of maybe outlandish at times, but at the same time, something I get so thrilled by because I'm so invested in the build up to the different action sequences, layered, kind of sustained sequences instead of just moments. This is what the franchise, at its best, and on many occasions has has offered to me, and we'll say it now. I think now is a great time to kind of, in wrapping up very soon on this review, this discussion, of course, to say that this film, this film here, License to Kill, is one of my favourite films of what is, and I've had kind of thinking on this very recently, simply because I was kind of making a particular list of my favourite franchises, in cinema, and I never really truly thought about that, in the case of, have I ever really said what is my number one favourite franchise? Not really, not really. In terms of actually committing to saying that is my favourite, over these ones. But I finally decided, the other day that James Bond is my number one favourite franchise of all time, and I think just this film means so much to me, and I think just James Bond in general. I think for me it's the franchise. It is the franchise where I look forward to every entry. And just I'm so invested in the lore. The recurring characters. How many films? To count how many films in such a long-running series, of course. That I love so much, and how many of them films say are in my top 250, top 100, top 60, perhaps as well. All these different numbers, of course, these brackets, and of course, just even the kind of Bond films that I maybe don't love as much. There's always really something. Pretty much all of the time, there is something that I can take from every Bond film, and just the magic of this series, the charm of it, the humanity of it, of course. The kind of the shock of these different films as well, the shocking moments of violence, but of course the kind of the wonderful moments, the kind of romantic moments, and of course the banter, of course, between different characters, Q and Bond, and of course Felix. All these different characters, all these films throughout, such. Of course, a long-running franchise. It's something that means so much to me, and of course, License to Kill is one of my favourite films in my absolute favourite franchise in cinema. So yes, as I've said, in this review, License to Kill is a truly special film to me. It's a special Bond film, and it is, of course, a very, very extreme Bond film. In its violence, of course, and its plot as well. And the characters, and of course, just the different moments to kind of open a film. Bond film. Its opening act, of course, with a wedding, and to have characters being killed in brutal ways, and of course injured in brutal ways, and to really be this violent, of course. But despite that, to really be full of heart, full of charm and humanity, I think is striking. This is such a stunning film, and yes, this rewatch is really just reminding me perhaps of how much I love this film, and how kind of how high I would put this, in my ranking, my specific ranking. Of course, everyone will be different. I know this is a divisive film. There's some I'm not too big on this film. Others, are really big on this film, and I'm on that side of it. I think this is just wow, a stunning Bond film, an absolute masterpiece. For action, just as a thriller, it's such an investing thriller where you really get the kind of the intriguing plot, something that I can get invested in, the kind of believable plot perhaps. Again, doesn't matter, of course, in that sense, in itself, what the Bond plot, it's kind of outlandish, bombastic, or if it's more grounded, it's just how it's executed, of course. Just like every film, in cinema, really every film, it's about the execution, not just what is happening, but how it's happening, and why, of course. And we get all of this, in the film. We get the motivations so perfectly established. We get these characters that we can care about. I get so behind, of course, the Bond girl of the film. For me, one of the best. I don't like to say a number because, of course, it's very hard. I will be doing. Different rankings, of course, in the future. But in terms of Bond girls, I think she's right up there with the very best. There's a few that I would probably, yes, I'd definitely take a few of them over this Bond girl. But Carey Lowell in this film is so good. I think she's wonderful, so wonderful in this film. Beautiful, so charming in this film, but so felt in the way, her determination as well, and of course the whole backstory to her, the way this film is written, the exposition to the different characters, and this whole world it's created is just so investing. I get so caught up in this, and yes, makes for such a rewarding film, a rich film, full of depth, of course, and at the same time, just watching this as a you know, it's such an entertaining kind of Bond film, for its action, for its, you know, its wonderful flow. The editing is really stunning. I think the editing in you know, in John Glen Bond films, you know, they never really disappoint. There's always something about, you know, the John Glen Bond films with the editing. It's just at least you know, nice in its flow. You know, I think he's such a great Bond director, one of the best. For sure, you know, these 5 films, I'm a fan of all of these films, and of course particularly this and For Your Eyes Only, I absolutely love. And yes, I think this film is the best Timothy Dalton film, the best John Glen directed Bond, and yes, for me, just one of the best action films ever made, because of course it is, you know, one of my favourite Bond films, so, you know, therefore it gets that kind of reward instantly, perhaps. But I'm such a big fan of this franchise. As I've said, this is, you know, I can finally, you know, confirm at least this is my favourite franchise of all time. And yes, License to Kill gets such an extremely high rating. You know, I really will give this an extremely high rating, of course. My final verdict, my final score, my final rating for this film is 100% plus. Tier 1, absolutely one of the best Bond films, and just one of the best, you know, action films ever made. This is just stunning. It really, really is such an investing film. You know, a crime action thriller, romance, of course, but a charming comedy as well, in different moments. Of course, the involvement of Q in the plot, and just seeing these different moments, as I've said, you know, the kind of moment, of course, the kind of you know, really peaceful moment, I feel, really warm moment, of course, and you know, just kind of charming moment, of course, where he's kind of, you know, inspecting the mattresses there, and all these different moments, of course, his interactions, you know, and this film is all about interactions, really, you know, the interactions between Q and, of course, Pam, and the way in which she really feels like an actual, you know, a truly wonderfully written character in this film. You know, Carey Lowell, of course, is so good in this film. You know, she's so great, and just perfect casting. You know, for every single character in this. You know, Sanchez, Robert Davi, you know, is so perfect. You know, he was a great actor. You know, in a, you know, spree of films. You know, in the 80s, you know, Die Hard as well, which of course Michael Kamen you know, scored as well. Interesting, but yes, you know, Die Hard, The Goonies as well. You know, so many roles, of course, and this film here, no exception. You know, so great. You know, the charm that he brings, the ruthless feeling, you know, the menace, you know, the menacing feeling, of course, the disturbing traits, of course, to this character. You know, someone who really is a villain, but really as well, you know, someone who you know, is not one-sided, and of course, just these moments, you know, as I've said, the recognition, you know, Bond, of course, his style, you know, someone who he actually admires, even though it's of course, you know, hero and villain together, you know, something that kind of, despite that, when they're in that room together there, that moment there is kind of sums up this complex, balanced film in these relationships, and just as well the drama, perhaps to romance, to the love triangle, of course, Lupe, you know, someone who's a really great character as well, and she kind of is really well written as well. A lot of emotional weight to her character, of course, but you know, in the end, you know, Bond ending up, of course, with Pam, and this whole kind of love triangle, this romance, is so wonderful to see. It's just so investing, something that just you know, pleases me so much in the way it kind of ends. And I personally love the fish winking at the end. You know, something that's just a magical kind of self-aware moment, perhaps, just something that I really love, how it ends there, and of course, you know, that the wonderful song at the end as well, if you ask me to, just such a kind of magical song that's used there in the credits, of course. So yes, just a wonderful film. License to Kill, for me, is an absolute masterpiece, and one of my favourite films of all time, because of course it's one of my absolute favourite Bonds, so therefore it will be. You know, I love Bond, and of course I cannot wait to see once again GoldenEye. I really just can't wait. You know, I love GoldenEye so much. So once again, expect an overwhelmingly positive review for that. But you know, that's just my personal take. Of course, tell me your thoughts on this film. We all have different opinions, and we may share an opinion, we may disagree, but it's just the great thing about Bond. is of course the fan base. I feel the best fan base, of all different franchises. Just the respect and just the excitement that we all bring, and the love for these films, and the discussion. The love of the discussion. Bond and the various Bond films, and some people love this film, some people don't. But at the end of all this, it's just about how we can enjoy discussing, our personal takes, and if we share an opinion or not, that's not really too important. It's about how we interact, the manner of it, and just the respect, of this fan base, of course, for this wonderful franchise. For me, the best franchise in cinema, and I can't wait, of course, to watch GoldenEye and talk about that. But of course, it'd be great to know what you think of this film. What do you think of Dalton's take on Bond? That'd be very interesting. I personally love it. I think it's so pure, so kind of raw as well, and just bring back this ruthless feeling, this hard edge, kind of real, just going back to this, real kind of gritty, power, this raw feeling, but of course the charm of it, and it's great to see. And yes, as I say, what do you think of this film? What do you think of these John Glen films? What do you think of the two Dalton films? How would you kind of discuss these together or separately? And what do you think of just Bond films in general? Any Bond discussions are absolutely welcome, of course. And just, in general, cinema. License to Kill, for me, is a masterpiece, and one of the best Bond films. So yes, as always, tell me your thoughts. Take care, of course. Take care, and yes, thanks for watching.